Applique is where small pieces of a fabric are cut out and attached to a base fabric. In this case, a patterned lightweight silk fabric has been attached to a cotton velvet. In this case, a spotty patterned fabric has been cut out and attached to this blue linen fabric, which in turn again has been attached to this denim fabric. The stitches can be done by machine, as in this case, or the stitches can be done by hand, as in this case. This is the applique that I'll be demonstrating in this video, and this is a close-up of the satin stitch that I'll be explaining how to do. In order to work with applique, I need to work with a bonding. This particular one is by Veline. It's called Bondaweb. It is a very thin sheet of glue attached to a piece of greaseproof paper. So just to demonstrate that, I've cut away a small piece, and you can see here the glue is attached to the paper. I am working from this motif, and because the Bondaweb is transparent, I'm going to trace directly onto the paper of the Bondaweb. So working with the glue side down, I'm going to tape this so it doesn't move while I'm tracing. I'm going to cut the applique pieces out of this black linen, and I will be applying them onto this white linen. This is the Bondaweb that I traced my shapes onto the back of. So I need to place it glue side down onto the fabric. You can iron directly onto it, but to avoid getting glue onto the base of the iron, I normally use a sheet of paper on top. I have the iron on a cotton setting. Just be sure it's a suitable temperature for the fabric that you're ironing your Bondaweb onto. Press evenly but with pressure. After that's about 20 to 30 seconds of pressing. So at this point, once the colour has changed, I don't need to iron it anymore. So now I just need to cut out the shapes that I've previously drawn onto the back of the sheets of paper. I have multiple options in terms of how I actually place them down on the fabric. So they look quite good like this. Now I need to peel the paper off the applique piece. So it can be a little bit tricky to get it started. You probably need to fold the corner back. Okay, so the paper has now started to come away from the back. Okay, and now you should be able to see there's glue on this side of the fabric and no glue on the other side of the fabric. So we need to be careful to place a glue side down. To attach them to the fabric, what I need to do is to iron them in place. So I'm just going to place a sheet of paper over the top, and that means I can place a little bit more pressure with the iron on the back. So it's very important here that you're pressing. So you're putting quite a bit of pressure down, because we're really trying to press the glue into the base fabric. So I'll just peel back the paper now and have a look. These look really well attached to the base fabric. In order to sew the applique pieces down onto fabric, to avoid the fabric puckering, it's important to place the fabric in a hoop. Now the hoop size that I have, I can see that they're coming a little bit too close to the edge, so I'll have to do each one individually and then move the hoop for the second one. So placing the bigger part of the hoop in underneath and checking that it is equidistant. Normally when we're working with applique, we're trying to put a satin stitch onto the applique pieces. So one way of doing that is with the stitch width to go to about 2.5. That's a pretty good width for most things. It's not too big, it's not too small. The stitch length should be brought up to 0. So on this machine, we're normally working around 2.5 to 3 for stitch length. So if you bring it right up to 0 and then bring it down a about a half turn. For most machines, whatever way your machine works, that should be a really good setting for applique. And that's all you need to do. Choose a wider stitch and choose a very short stitch length. Another alternative is to leave the stitch length in its normal position and to leave the stitch width in its normal position. But to choose the buttonhole setting on this machine here, when I go to setting 1, what happens is the stitch width alters, so it's actually setting up for a buttonhole zigzag stitch on stitch width 2, and it is automatically resetting the stitch length here to a very, very short stitch length for me. So that's another option, simply using one of your buttonhole settings and going on continuously sewing on that setting. The foot that I'm using is a number 23, which is an applique foot. The advantage of this foot is that it's plastic, so I can see the piece of applique underneath it, and it's cut with a wider groove in it to enable me to fit the stitches in underneath. To place the hoop underneath the foot, I need to temporarily remove the foot, put the hoop in, and then I can replace the foot inside the hoop. So when I'm ready to start, I can drop the foot down. By hand, I will turn the wheel on the machine to make sure that the thread is going to hit the edge of the applique piece and then stitch inwards from there. The machine gets very confused if I'm stitching half the time onto a single layer of the fabric and half the time onto a double layer with fusing on it. So I want to stitch just to the edge of the fabric and in. When I reach the end here, I need to take care with regard to which side the needle is on so that I stay within the black section. Take care to go slowly around the corners, making sure to line the needle up on the correct side of the applique piece. You will need to lift the foot many times when working around tight corners and angles. You'll need to take the foot off to remove the hoop. This is the finished piece, so I can take the hoop away. And this is the front, and there is the back. So I suppose if you're appliquing well, the back will look nearly as neat as the front. Zooming in then on the details here, so you can see the stitch is here, the zigzag stitch. We refer to it as a satin stitch when it's used on the edge of the applique like this. You can see over here as well where I was having to work very carefully around the corners. Just looking at other ways of stitching the applique into place. So one way of working is with a free machine embroidery foot. Now it does take quite some concentration to follow all of the curves, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. So hanging onto the 2 threads at the back, getting started here manually with that first stitch. Okay, so now I can let go of the thread at the back. So it's important here that I don't stitch too close to the edge of the fabric, because if I'm stitching too close to the edge, effectively I'm not holding it with the thread. So I need to stitch in maybe 2-3 millimeters is a good amount. Okay, so that is stitching it on with a running stitch. You can also attach the piece of applique by stitching lines internally inside the piece of fabric. This adds a lot of texture and is maybe a little bit less stressful when working with a free machine foot than trying to follow the exact outline of the piece of applique. So zooming in, that's a close-up of the stitches that I did. Obviously, if I was using a contrasting thread colour, this would stand out a little bit better. Another option is to do a selection of squiggly lines to hold the piece of applique in place. Again, this adds nice texture. You can just about see them there in the close-up. Working in a similar way, you can also stitch those squiggly lines outside of the applique pieces, which softens the edge. So you can just about see the details there. Okay. Another technique that I wanted to try was putting some sellotape on the base of the regular sewing machine foot. This apparently makes the base of the foot more slippy, so it behaves more like the see-through plastic foot that I was working with at the beginning of the video. So this is a completed piece that I did using the foot with the sellotape at the base, and it worked very effectively and it slid around the shapes very well. This is a close-up of that regular straight stitching foot or zigzag foot, and you can just about see the sellotape that I've stuck onto the base of it. It's just sticking out on the sides there. I punctured a small hole here just to allow the thread through, and that has been a successful experiment.